Hi everyone, this is Alan Rosinski of Metro Manhattan Office Space. Good afternoon. Today I'd like to discuss security deposits in commercial leases in New York City. Your security deposit is certainly going to be your single largest expense if you acquire a space in New York City and really anywhere else. And I think it's important for you to understand how landlords determine the security deposit, what you can do to negotiate the lowest security deposit number, and what are the different types of security deposits. And also I'll be showing you two different clauses which I have compiled, just showing you the complexity, what's involved, the language which is used by landlords to describe a security deposit. So basically, when you acquire a space, a landlord is going to determine the security deposit based on the perceived risk. Landlords, when they have multiple tenants in a building, there's always some of them which default, and landlords have a lot of liability when this happens. There's deal-making costs, and they can really take a hit if a tenant disappears. So typically, security deposits in New York City range from 2 months to a year. A startup without a good guy guarantee, with no track record in a building which is owned by a conservative landlord, may be forced to pay as much as 1 year of security deposit. A public company, an international law firm, a very well-known organization may only have to pay a 2-month security deposit. Now, when I represent my clients, I almost always suggest that we offer 2 months of security deposit because that's about the lowest that you can legitimately request. Now, after you run around with a broker identifies a space that you like, you want to put an offer in, be prepared to submit financial statements with that offer. And the reason you have to do that is the only way for a landlord to determine what the appropriate security deposit is going to be is by seeing the last couple of years of your corporate tax returns, audited financial statements. You're going to need this information. And what I think is really important is try to avoid withholding information from a landlord. There's a temptation to do that because these documents are very, very confidential. But if the landlord feels that information is being withheld, being as cautious as they generally are, that might result in a higher security deposit. It's a good thing to just be very, very open with them. Now, let's say you are a startup, or let's say maybe for some reason the financial performance of your company has been a little bit soft and the landlord wants a greater security deposit than you feel would be optimal. There's a workaround for that. That workaround is called a burn down. So let's say you put an offer in on a space and you're hoping to get a 2-month security deposit, and you submit everything to the landlord along with your financials, and the landlord wants 5 months, and maybe at the end of the day you agree on 4. What you can ask for is, say, a burn down of 1 or 2 months. Say ask for a burn down of 2 months. So what that burn down means is a contingent on timely rent payments, the landlord will return some of that security deposit. So let's say you were hoping for 2 months and the security is 4. You can ask the landlord to maybe return 1 month of security after a year and another month after 2 years. So you're down to 2 months. And I think it's a pretty fair solution for all parties because the landlord has an extra layer of protection for the first couple of years. And once you've established a track record in their building, you get 2 months of the security deposit and you're down to 2 months security. But this is all negotiable. Now, I want to discuss the types of security deposit. There's basically a cash security deposit and a letter of credit. And the difference from a landlord's perspective is if the security deposit is a letter of credit, I think there's some form of bankruptcy proceedings, God forbid, but I mean, if a landlord has 100, 200 tenants, that does happen from time to time. If there's a bankruptcy proceeding and there's a letter of credit, the landlord gets to keep it. If there's a cash security deposit and there's a bankruptcy proceeding, the security deposit can get divvied up among the different creditors, so it's not as favorable for the landlord. They could lose that security deposit. The more sophisticated landlords frequently will ask for a letter of credit. The smaller landlords, it's less frequent. I mean, if you want to keep your security deposit to an absolute rock bottom, you could offer the security deposit in the form of a letter of credit. And so you understand what's involved with that. There's a bit of an application fee to the bank, and you have to pay the bank annually. The funds stay frozen in your account, but you can't access those funds. And the letter of credit exists for a certain set period of time. So let's say you have a 5-year lease, you set up a letter of credit for 5 years. You can also have a burn down on a letter of credit. Now, with the cash security deposit, you just write a check to the landlord, and then the landlord returns it to you at the end of the lease, assuming you're current on the rent, and you're returning the space to the landlord in good condition, that it hasn't been damaged in any way. Another factor which can affect the amount of security deposit is whether or not there's a good guy guarantee for the lease. Recently, I produced a video defining and explaining what a good guy guarantee is, and I would suggest that you view the video because good guy guarantees can reduce, or they do reduce, the amount of security deposit. But in some cases, it's not possible to have a good guy guarantee. For instance, in a public corporation where there's no individual owner or no so-called principal, there's not going to be a good guy guarantee. Or in a company which is based overseas, a good guy guarantor located in another country would have little value. So bear in mind, in situations where it's not possible to have a good guy guarantee, your security deposit could be somewhat more. So my viewers can better understand what security deposit clauses look like in New York City commercial leases. I've gone through leases going back 15 years and have put together 2 sample clauses. One of them is a real simple clause and the other one is somewhat more complex, but it should give you a pretty good idea. The simple one is probably not worth more than about 80 words. It basically says, what does it say? The security deposit set forth in this article, this lease shall be held by owner without liability for interest, so they don't have to pay you interest, as security for full and faithful performance by the tenant in each and every term. Owner shall have the right to commingle the security deposit, so they don't have to keep your security deposit in a separate account. And what they do say is tenant understands and agrees that no part of the security deposit may be applied towards the payment of the rent. So what that means is, let's say you got 3 months of security deposit, you'd be in default of your lease if you don't pay rent in the last 3 months and apply the security deposit towards that. So, I mean, you really should respect the terms of the lease and make your lease payments until the very end of your lease term. Now, the next more complex security deposit clause is a lot longer. It's almost an entire page, but I'm not going to read this, but I'm just going to go over it conceptually. Section A describes what's involved with the letter of credit. Section C means that if you assign the lease, a security deposit can be assigned to the new tenant. And D describes the burn down. So, I mean, these are things that we've discussed. It's a little more complicated, but it's really not so complicated that you can't understand it reading it. I hope you found this video interesting. I really do suggest that you look at the good guy guarantee as well, because that's really important. It's sort of part and parcel of security deposits. If you found this content interesting or helpful, I'd be happy if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Metro Manhattan. Until the next time.